Alright, in this video I'm going to do a summary of all the energy upgrades I've done to my home. I'm going to go in order of the cheapest upgrade to the most expensive upgrades. Everything will be time-stamped, and in the description I will leave links to the full videos of each of these jobs. I would say the cheapest job overall was the installation of a roof vent. This vent cost about $30 Canadian, and then there was maybe $20 of additional expenses for nails and adhesive and stuff like that. So overall, not very expensive, definitely less than $100 Canadian. Ensuring that you have adequate roof ventilation, whether it's through a vent like this or through a ridge vent or a gable vent, is important in keeping the temperature down in your attic space. This doesn't save you on heating in any way, but it will save you in cooling if your attic is overly hot. In my case, there was no attic vent anywhere in this section of roof, so it made a big difference in what was my bedroom. I did have a thermometer in the attic space, and you can see that it topped out at about 55 Celsius, which is really as high as that thermometer would go. So it was very hot in the attic space. The time required to add a vent is really about 2 hours, depending on your skill level. So if you schedule a day to do this, that's more than enough time. This job does, however, require a little bit of skill, since you do have to cut a hole in your roof, and you do have to ensure that your shingles are still going to be waterproof when you're done this task. Obviously, you don't want leaks. So this could be something that you might want to contract someone out for, and quite frankly, it shouldn't be that expensive if you were to pay a professional to do it as well. The second least expensive job on this list was the installation of new rafter baffles. You can see that all of mine had either collapsed or they weren't in existence. And this job does go hand in hand with installing the roof vent. I found that each of these styrofoam rafter baffles cost about $3 each, give or take, and I needed 2 of them to go in between each rafter just based on the slope of my roof. Ultimately, I think I used about 40 of them, so I was about $120 in on this rafter baffle installation and upgrade in certain circumstances. Once again, this doesn't have much to do with heating your house, but it will help in cooling your house because it'll allow that cool air from your soffits to come up and replace the hot air in your attic cavity, and then your roof vent will allow that hot air to escape out of the top of your roof. Overall, I found it took 5 to 10 minutes per rafter, so it did take the better part of a day. This job is not particularly difficult, but it is very hot and it is very dirty, so you have to keep that in mind before taking this one on. Number 3 on my home efficiency projects is upgrading my old Mercury tilt thermostat to an Ecobee smart thermostat. Any smart thermostat is good to go. It doesn't have to be an Ecobee. For the basic things, they can be under $100. For the more advanced ones, you can get them over $300. This one is going to allow me to do 2-stage heating and cooling, which ultimately will save natural gas and electricity depending on what time of year it is. It also gives you a whole bunch of monitoring options, and it just gives you a lot of features that aren't on the old Mercury tilt thermostat. I found installation was done in about an hour. It can be difficult depending on how your wiring is set up, and you do need to know what you're doing when it comes to wiring your furnace. For this job, if you're not confident in doing some basic electrical work, you might want to call an HVAC installer. Now for me, I slotted LED light bulbs right after the Ecobee for cost because I had to do the entire home, basically top to bottom, and I needed to change out some of the light fixtures because they couldn't take an LED, that kind of thing. So I do believe I'm over $300 on bulbs and fixtures to reduce my energy draw. This is probably the biggest savings per dollar spent you can get, depending on which lights you have. If you already have compact fluorescent lights or other low energy lights, perhaps the LEDs aren't a huge savings, but if you're running 60 or 100 watt light bulbs, going down to a 10 watt or less will obviously save you huge on your electricity bill. And of course, installation of LED light bulbs is very simple. Number 5 on my list is rim joist insulation. Now, how effective this is really going to depend on how bad your rim joists are to begin with. You can see that mine are really bad. I found the upgrade to the rim joist insulation really helped heating and cooling the house depending on the season. And it also helped a lot in keeping the floor on the first floor of the house, the main level, a lot warmer because you didn't have that cold rim joist also touching the floor and causing the floor to get very cold. For this job, I used R22 rock wool and doubled it up, and my aim was to get approximately an R40 rim joist overall. A couple other things I used were spray foam, acoustic sealant, and plastic. The use of vapor barrier really depends on where you live, and even what side of the insulation the vapor barrier on will be dictated by where you live. So you got to check your own building codes for that. Since I was going for R40 but using R22 bats, I needed to use 2 pieces per rim joist, and I found that each bat could do 2 rim joists. Overall, for the whole basement, I had an equivalent of about 90 rim joists to do, and that's for about a 1,200 square foot basement. Obviously, it could be a little more, a little bit less, depending on how your house is set up. For my house, I ended up using about 6 bags of the R22 rock wool. Those are going for $85 each. So that's about $510 Canadian. And then I had some additional expenses with the plastic, the acoustic sealant, the spray foam insulation. So all in, I feel that I was at about $700 Canadian to do all the rim joists in the basement. Although this job wasn't difficult, it was time consuming, especially doing it this way where I was cutting individual pieces of plastic and using the acoustic sealant. Definitely added a lot of time. And for me, I ended up doing about 5 rim joists each evening, and I sort of spread that out over about a month or so. So it does take a long time, and it does take a long time if you have to go around ductwork as well. However, I didn't find the job was particularly difficult, just time consuming. All right, next up, I got blown in fiberglass insulation. I used the Owens Corning Attic Cat, and I used the 32.6 square foot bundles. So it's not a huge bundle of insulation, and I ended up using 12 of them. Overall, I'd say that this was the most impactful job as far as keeping the house cooler in the summer and keeping it warmer in the winter. Just because you lose a lot of heat from the attic, and also when the roof gets hot, you gain a lot of heat in the summer from the attic. Now my attic space is about 1,000 square feet, give or take a little bit, and I went from an R25 to an R45, so that's an increase of R value of 20. And I used 12 of the bundles of the Attic Cat insulation, which cost $78 each Canadian. The resulting total cost was approximately $1,100 Canadian once taxes were included. As far as this job goes, it took probably about 2 hours to complete. You definitely need 2 people to do it because one person stays either outside or in the garage, wherever you have the machine, and feeds the bales of the Attic Cat insulation into the machine, and one person has to be up top blowing it in. You can't do it by yourself, it just wouldn't work very well. As long as you can easily access your attic, I think this is a job that most people can do without too much difficulty. And one thing that you might want to consider before spraying in the insulation is to do any air sealing beforehand that you might require. So that could add some time if that's something that you have to do on your house. Overall, I think this is a great DIY job. My final and most expensive insulation project was redoing the basement wall insulation. You could see that I had a half wall. Previously, you were allowed to just do the insulation to the frost line, which is why it's about 3 feet below the level of the ground and then it stops. Most of the houses in the area now have continuous floor to ceiling insulation in the basement with the vapor barrier all tied into the joist headers. So in my case, I did have to do quite a bit of extra work with the wood on the bottom half of the wall. And for the insulation, I used rock wool again. And this is an R14 rock wool because I'm running a 2x3 wall, and the 2x3 wall is sitting about 1 inch away from the concrete. My basement is approximately 1,200 square feet, and the full perimeter, if you're just measuring around the outside of the basement, is about 136 feet. In order to cover the full basement, I found that I needed about 15 bags of the R14, and there's 12 bats of insulation in each bag. Each bag ran me about $80. So just for the insulation, it was $1,200 plus tax Canadian. But then I also needed things like the wood, the tape, the staples, the plastic, the Tyvek, that kind of stuff. So I'm sure I was in to about $1,500 to $1,600 to insulate all of the basement walls. Overall, a little expensive, and it was pretty time consuming as well. So as far as dollars spent, time invested, and impact, I would say the attic was much better than the basement, although getting them both done was good because both of them were in very bad shape. And the last thing that I had done was replacing all of the doors and windows. There's a couple windows in the basement that are still old, but for the most part, everything was redone. It was a very expensive job. I think it was close to $20,000 Canadian, so not cheap. And I didn't do this as a DIY project. I actually contracted the whole job out. And the reason I didn't want to do the windows and doors is because there's about 18 of them. So even if I did one every weekend, it would have taken me probably a half of a year to do them all myself. So I didn't want to take that on, considering there was a lot of other small projects around the house, and still are, that I would be able to pick up and get on top of myself and leave this to somebody that can come in with a crew and just have it all done within the matter of 2 or 3 days. So I think I made the right decision on this. Although windows and doors are expensive, they do have the added benefit of being first and foremost an energy savings item, but they also have the added benefit of being an aesthetic item. There's definitely an added benefit that the insulation jobs don't have. A lot of people would come in and not notice or care that you had new R14 in your basement or new R40 insulation blown into your attic. But when they come in and see new windows and doors, that's something they can look at and some people fall in love with. Nobody's going to fall in love with R14 insulation in the basements. So there is a benefit to windows and doors that some of the other energy saving projects I took on just don't have. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.